Hi everyone, welcome to VANQ. Today is our second session of this year, and we are pleased to have Ben McConnell from Recon Instruments, and we will be having few questionnaire sessions with Ben, and Ben will be sharing his insights, his experience, as well as some guidance on the testing side that is happening at Recon Instruments. I would let Ben to introduce and make share more information about him.
Sure. Thanks, Ramit. Nice to meet everybody. Maybe I'll do a quick walkthrough of my background as questions come up and we start dialogue. It'll make sense to understand where I've come from. Can you guys hear us at the back? No. It's on, but we've got limited volume. Do we know how to dial the volume up?
Just give me 1 second.
Sure. In the meantime, I'll talk loud and stuff the mic right in my face. My background is I've been 10 years in the engineering industry, starting out in actually I started out in test and have moved away from test probably from early on in terms of being an actual tester myself. Started out in hardware test automation, developing automated scripts to control hardware test equipment for RF base station test sets. Moved from there into a software development role, and then from there into sort of a combined software hardware applications engineering role, where I was working for a company called PMC Sierra, where we developed microchips for storage, communications, and wireless industries, and worked with key tier 1 accounts and bridged the gap between marketing, product management, engineering, and our customer side. So dealt on customer sites to get our systems or our chips built into their systems and up and running seamlessly and manage and support those over their lifetime. Since then, I've moved into Recon Instruments. I've been at Recon for just over a year's time. My focus there is on the product management side, and Recon's a 50-person company with a single product in market today, so I wear multiple hats in that role. Part of that role is to manage the QA team, which consists of 3 engineers today, and it's growing. We'll talk a little bit about that. But our focus on the single product that I talked about is actually broken up into 4 main product branches, one being a heads-up display for sports. It's an Android-based microcomputer equivalent to what you've got on most of your smartphones today. It pairs to 2 different mobile apps, one Android, one iPhone, and we've got a web backend to support that. So within a single product line, we've actually got a distributed compute system across 4 different main platforms that we need to test against and support on an ongoing basis. The current iteration of the heads-up display is in a snow goggle today, so it allows you to see your speed, distance traveled, altitude, where your buddy is if you're skiing with a different individual, through GPS tracking and capability that the heads-up display supports, and then travels down through the cell phone onto the web back end and into your buddy's display essentially. And we're growing that foundation from the snow market into a broader sports market, initially targeting cyclists, triathletes, runners, and that sort of thing, in what we call the Recon Jet product. So that's a heads-up display mounted to sports sunglasses. Again, it's an Android-based computer. All of the compute functionality of your smartphone, including the sensor capability and wireless communication capability. With the exception of the 4G connection, we rely on the smartphone for that. And we'll have a similar sort of structure of mobile apps and web backend to develop and test over the course of the next 6 to 9 months as we release that product. So that's where we stand today. And that's a little bit about me. I think for me, I'll get into some more details there, but open to dialogue and questions as we go.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. So we have list of questions here, and in case if someone has some questions in between, please raise up your hand and we will accommodate that in our discussions. All right. So Ben, thanks for the intro. And I would like to begin the first question. How would your average developer answers the question, what is the role of a tester?
I'm assuming the room is largely tester-based, so I won't offend any developers, although I'm sure there's a mix of developers as well. At Recon, and considering that we're a startup company, relatively young, and there's a lot of sort of can-do attitude and best effort on a lot of things that we're growing out of, and we're kind of at that transition phase now where we've got more than 50,000 products in market today that we're supporting. The sort of the background there is to explain that we've come from an environment where the developer would answer that question to say the role of a QA engineer is to dictate the quality of the product, and that you know they're putting their final stamp of approval on the product, and that's really where the quality and polish comes from. And developers develop and testers test, and quality is defined at the test level. We are trying to move out of that role or sort of realm into a mode where we accept that unit testing and a lot of developer-driven tests really define the quality, and at the end of the day, the tester is really putting that final level of polish on it, and is really being the first user to the consumer electronics market in our case.
Thanks. That's interesting to know that developers are not against testers.
Not at all.
Yeah, good. So okay, the second question that has come is, how many years of professional experience does your average developer has?
Developer?
Developer or testers? Okay.
Specifically at Recon, our average developer would have on the order of, I'd say 5 to 7 years experience is typical. We've got a good mix of sort of light at the senior level, and we've got quite a few junior new grads mixed with R&D students and people with good industry experience. But I think it'd average out probably at about 5 years.
And what about testers?
Testers, comparable experience actually. Headcount-wise different, but experience-wise about the same. Our test group consists solely of engineers today, so most of, when I say engineers, I mean there's a broad range or a broad spectrum of engineering in there, but everyone has a relatively scientific computer science or engineering related background to the point where some of them have come from development streams and into the test stream, and we find that to be valuable at Recon given just the breadth of technology that we're integrating into our product.
Thanks. So the reason why I asked this question about developers' experience as well as the testers' experience was to make sure that in the current market that what we are getting is the testers in current market, they also have a lot of development experience. And that helps in creating test automation scripts and similar skill sets that are required. So that's the reason why I asked about the developer's experience. Okay. Next question is, how many other developers perform code reviews on, say, a change before that is checked in, or is that is a practice that you follow there?
Yeah. Yeah, we do follow a code review practice, and it's purely development focused, meaning that QA doesn't have any role in that. But there is a code review that happens between junior developers and senior developers. In some cases, because we're a smaller company, senior developers will develop and sanction their own code, for example, which is a practice that ideally we'll move away from and be a little bit more formalized there as we go forward. But it's worked well in the past and sort of keeps things lightweight. As we grow in distribution volume and product volume, it makes sense to be a little bit more regimented there. And one thing that we've actually done from the QA department outward to the dev department is to put a contract in place, essentially, for lack of a better term, that dictates that any code that is being taken into the QA team meets a certain criteria and a certain test criteria by the development team. And I think we'll talk a little bit about unit testing, but generally specifying that any code that's been entered has been reviewed and has been tested to a certain extent before the QA team gets it, and then the QA team is committing on the reverse that we'll test it in a certain way that makes the most sense to the development team and in a timely manner. So we make a commitment to them from the QA side, and development makes a commitment back.
Thank you. Any questions so far?
Did you test your units like environment testing, like shake-proof, because you for sports bulletproof maybe?
Yeah.
Do you have some military application, like, because it's kind of can be very natural team coordination?
Yep, sure.
Please.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you didn't hear the back, the question was around sort of hardware and mechanical testing, shake testing, bulletproofing, all of that kind of stuff, because of the nature of Recon's sports-oriented product. And the answer is yes, we do that testing. In the case of bulletproofing, for example, that's a good question. With the snow goggle that's currently in market, we developed the heads-up display technology, so all of the electronics and software that go into making the product tick, and then we provide a spec to goggle vendors. The goggle vendor then creates a goggle that the heads-up display can snap into. So in that scenario, we're not actually developing the goggles to where we need to be bulletproofed, for example. We're an IPX65 rating on the heads-up display, which is a certain level of waterproofing that I think dictates some number of liter of water is being sprayed at the unit over a given time. So it's not submersible, but it's highly water resistant. Now moving into the glasses, we're finding that's a whole different ballgame. We've got to be FDA compliant because eyewear is considered to be a medical device. You have to pass drop ball testing, which has different levels of compliance depending on whether you want to be military spec and be bulletproof, or just be sort of safety compliant. We fit on the sort of the more military side of that line, but not all the way to it at the moment, to the point where we over-test. So we slot into a typical eyewear category, but we over-test to a spec that is close to military and is actually required for safety eyewear. And that's because we do have some engagements where safety compliance makes a lot of sense. And because we live in a sporting world, that it makes sense to sort of overachieve there on safety. A lot of that testing happens in our engineering department, core to the development side. So the tests and the actually fulfillment of those tests happens within our development teams, and traditionally does not happen within QA. So QA usually gets their hand on the product when it's finished, and a lot of our QA testing, when I say finished, the hardware is tested. A lot of the QA testing is focused at the software level. I recently moved the team into sort of a breakup that or bifurcated the team to dedicate one of the members. Remember, it's only a 3-person team. One of the members into a system engineering role where their focus is to focus a little bit more on the hardware and firmware side of things, so that we brought that test value into QA as a third-party entity to really validate that we were driving some of those tests and that they weren't falling by the wayside given schedule, which often happens in development.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So this is an interesting question. Where in the development cycle are the most of the defects found?
Sure. I think that's an easy one. Without a doubt, it happens at an alpha phase. Part of that is by the nature of the way we develop, and part of it is by the nature of the way we test. At Recon, we follow a pretty standard alpha beta release candidate kind of a flow. Leading up to alpha, QA is involved, but typically involved to the level where we're ramping up, getting familiar with the product, finding early bugs that are, typically less severe and somewhat known or somewhat understood within development, and we're part of the solution process there. And then the criteria for alpha is that we're allowing bugs into alpha, but that we're feature complete. And so we typically spend the bulk of our time prior to any given release in alpha before getting to beta. And we often find a lot of bugs that were unknown at that time with high severity, and our mandate is to crush those bugs before we exit alpha and enter beta.
Thank you. So how does testing that factor into your exit criteria usually?
Yeah, I guess the alpha beta release candidate theme factors into that question. QA has the ability, and traditionally they haven't. I've driven that change within the sort of the last major releases that we've done, to give QA the ability to gate any release. So at the end of the day, they get final sign-off, and really it's a collaborative sign-off to where they're making sure that the bugs that do exist that are known are clearly communicated, and the stakeholders then get to make a decision to release or hold based on those existing bugs. So they definitely feed into that decision process and have the ability to raise the red flag and halt any given release.
Thank you. So the next question is, are these testers, you might have already answered in some way, but to be very specific, are these testers and developers, they are in the same team or they are in a different group? How is the composition of these?
Sure. Yeah, we are, I think our structure is pretty standard or familiar at least in the fact that we have the QA team and the development team separated. So we treat QA as somewhat of a third-party entity, which we find is a good way to do things, given that they're not swayed by development easily, and also their mandate is separate from development. I've been in companies where there's a combined resource that does development and test, and often there's a conflict of interest there that proves challenging, and it's very easy to push out, have testing be the thing that pushes out in favor of getting the final pieces of development in to meet a schedule in the case of a waterfall kind of development. So we separate those two roles out, or two groups rather out, and there's some deviation there.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, Swapna?
Just following up on your release cycle, so how long is a release cycle, or do you do planning meetings, and how far in advance they are done? Just a little bit of the process of like a release process.
Sure. We do follow planning sessions, and Recon today is kind of an agile light environment. So we're trying to get into an agile mode, but we probably sit somewhere in the middle of a traditional waterfall and a more agile environment. Some teams are quite agile in the case of our web development teams, and some of our apps teams more conducive to that. And the other teams we're kind of pulling out of the traditional realm, but there's good reason to, I think, hold on to some of those pieces. But in any case, the way that I think the easiest way to relate our release cycle is to talk to our product cycle. Our product cycle is such that if you look at the snow season, it's very easy to analyze that because it's a seasonal product. So we spend all of our time as sort of at the front half of the year fixing any issues and dropping releases on a regular basis. Typically, we're doing internal releases on a 2-week period, and we're cutting external releases on a monthly or bi-monthly basis to support the customers, depending on the magnitude of issues that we find inside of a given sprint release. And then if you kind of fast forward to springtime, we're then in heavy development mode for the next year's product. And depending on whether or not there's been a hardware redesign or not, that sort of shapes the scope of the effort there and the scope of the challenges that we face. To the point where it's either a polishing effort where we're picking and choosing things that we want to improve upon or feature adds that we want to make for a given year on existing hardware, or support needs for new hardware, if the case might be, which was the case last year, for example. We were introducing new hardware and trying to get a relatively similar feature set ported over to a new hardware platform. So that sort of takes up the back half of spring and summer to where QA is involved, but there's not, and there are regular sprint sessions, but the output of those sessions don't necessarily, well, they definitely don't get the same QA rigor that a pre-alpha, alpha, or beta release would get, just given that they're immature in the development cycle. And then typically we get to, within 2 months of a release is the goal, where we're then testing with heavy rigor and marrying to that sort of 2-week sprint cycle, to where there is a blessing that comes from the QA team and everybody understands the health of a given sprint before the next sprint comes out, essentially. And then we get into a release cycle where that's where QA really can then gate the release or the release candidate, as we talked about on the last question.
You have 2 more questions. Yeah.
So, I was under the impression you guys offer a software development kit for third-party suppliers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, how do you go about QAing third-party software by other developers for the Recon platform?
Good question. Sort of to address that, we do release publicly an external SDK, which includes a full API suite to allow developers to develop on the product. And we do have multiple apps that have been developed for the product that today we don't have a storefront where we're necessarily blessing those apps and reissuing them as Recon product. So there's there's less of an onus on us to get in and validate those and test them and understand what's in the market. We've got a handful of apps that do fit into that category that are more sort of partner-centric apps. For example, with the Snow product today, we have a polar heart rate monitor that sits on the app, and it's relatively a third-party developed app that we test and bless because it ships with the product. So it would go through the same test rigor that the base device would go through because it is coming from Recon. Otherwise, other heavily used apps in the market, of which there's only a handful for the Snow product, given the sort of the scope of the user scope of that product. We expect this to change as we go forward with the next generation product. But we will cherry pick, highly used and sort of general use case kind of apps and do internal testing as well, and they fit into the QA cycle, and ideally they fit into a QA cycle when we've got some downtime on our own internal testing, such that we can understand how those apps work and if they break anything in the system. So the baseline is for us to understand the impact of a given third-party app on our system, and then secondary to that is to understand how well the app is working. And to kind of stage that, moving forward, as I said, with the new product, we expect significant developer traction, and we're working with multiple developers, third-party developers today, to develop third-party apps. And the expectation would be that we move to a point where there is some forum to market those apps, and as such they'd have to meet certain criteria governed by Recon. So we would sort of grow that testing as that ecosystem grew.
We have one more question from back. Yes, please.
Is there a path that QA will say no to a release?
Yep, definitely. I'm trying to think of an example, but yeah, there have been times where QA has gated a release and pushed it out by days or weeks at a time in order to drive further development and then retest of a given bug. Most times there's a debate that happens when QA is gating a release because somebody submitted something that they think is releasable and it's been in the test funnel for some time. So it's typically a surprise if you get to the end of it and then QA raises their hand and says no, this won't go out the door. So it's usually a softer case where there's something that somebody feels is good enough and QA feels is not good enough. So we debate it and bring the stakeholders in and make a decision. I'm lucky in my role that I'm a product owner and a stakeholder, and I manage the QA team, so it makes it a little bit easier. And our guys have good insight into what our customer needs are. But an example of that would be our compass on our heads-up display needs to be calibrated. And we had a solution that was workable, but it had some nuances or quirks to it, for lack of a better term. And QA is able to look at that from a user perspective and say, you know what, nope, we don't have enough clarity here from a UI perspective to educate our customers on how to do this, and we think it's going to result in too many failures. And that did drive a change back down the chain to the development team, to the point where that was a simple one where we were just educating the customer more through feedback on how to properly calibrate. But I think a good example of that, it gated and put us back a couple of days, but it was worth it.
One more question. Yes, please.
Just to base on the question that you asked earlier, do you guys have any sort of like hard deadlines, and what do you guys do with like say QA gates a release?
Yeah, good question. I'll go back to my statement that we are an agile light environment. So we, ideally on a sprint cycle, we're not deadline focused. We are sort of feature and content focused. But again, because of the snow product being a seasonal product, there's always a hard deadline at the end of the road that we have to meet, because we've got to get software on the product as it's coming off the manufacturing line to go ship to our partners and out to our customers. So in those cases, those deadlines are somewhat, we try to buffer those the hard deadlines to some extent, so there's a little bit of gray area, but typically we're making hard decisions at that point to strip features, similar to a sprint cycle, and focus in on the key features and the features that are highly functional, and polishing those at the late stages. Otherwise, if we're mid-cycle or if we're just doing a software release where we haven't actually committed to an external partner and it's really for the betterment of the customer, then QA has the ability to make that decision to say, we need to improve something here, and we'll absorb a time hit essentially to make sure that the release is better for the customer versus out to them at a certain time, because we're dictating that time in that case.
All right, two more. All right, Stu.
Yes, we do. We are traditionally not automation heavy. We've been very black box test focused, and actually that's where my experience with Optimus comes in. We've used the Optimus team to augment our team and do a lot of testing around sort of core release cycles. Where we were doing heavy development and trying to release to a schedule. Like I talked about on the major release front when the product is actually going to market, and in those times everybody is hands-on black box testing focused. In the downtimes of the seasonal product, we are focused on automating core pieces of our test procedure, and we've made some good progress there. And our approach has been to take our test plan, cherry pick some points across the Android app, for example, is one that is very conducive to test automation. So we focused on that. We get high return on having that piece automated versus manually testing it, take the human factor out of the equation. and we're making progress beyond that today. But the web and some of the mobile apps today have a degree of test automation built into them, and we have a goal to improve that.
Stu.
You mentioned you were agile light. Do you have any plans to create earlier in the life cycle and maybe more white box testing focus?
Please, can you repeat your question?
I caught most of the question.
So I was just saying, you mentioned your agile light.
Yeah.
Have you got any plans to bring QA earlier into the life cycle and perhaps a little bit more white box?
Earlier into the life cycle? Yeah. Absolutely, yes. That is a goal. And QA is involved earlier in the life cycle planning, and that's because we're in a sort of a lumpy, very seasonal product today, which we expect to take the lumps out with the next generation product. We use some of those downtimes to get them ingrained into the development team and understand changes that are coming down the pipe and work those into the automation test suites. Unfortunately, there's not typically enough of a time period there, nor is there enough of a resourcing allocation to get everything we want to get done. So we nudge into the white box realm and then drop back to the black box or a mix. We're kind of gray box testers when the heat is on, essentially, through heavy release cycles and through our core season. Moving forward, that's something that we want to get out of. And we're trying to do that by offloading some of the black box testing that we do today to partners, and then bringing in resources where we can develop and manage a lot of our own sort of white box developed testing and grow that going forward. So that, right now we're on the dark side of the gray testing, and we want to get lighter and lighter as time goes on. I think we'll always do the nature of our product is such that there'll be some degree of black box testing. And we're trying to structure out of that. So we're actually, to segue into a marketing piece, we're hiring and looking for a senior test engineer today to lead some of that migration from black box into white box. But we have that notion that there still will be a black box component during key times. And we do get good benefit out of that and have junior testers that focus on that piece, and through that sort of gray scale, we rely today and will continue to rely heavily on the Optimus guys.
Question, maturity of product. Like Windows, we have 8.1, and what's your number?
Yeah, our number is released to market today. We have Recon OS 3.2. So our company was founded in 2008. Our first product hit the market in 2010. And we've iterated on the product as a core 4 times. We've got the 4th generation of hardware product in the market today. 2 of those ship concurrently. And the OS has developed to a degree of maturity that we're at a 3.2 level. We're over the course of the last product release, our goal was really to develop a foundation, both from a hardware perspective and then a software perspective, such that we can grow incrementally on that foundation and always grow from a known starting point that we've got good test and background and roots in, to grow into incrementally to the point where we're not doing wholesale changes, which has been the case in the past, given that we were a new company and there's some annual reinvention that happens as part of that nature. So I think to your question, we're at a level now where we're trying to take the point 1, point 2, point 3 kind of level steps and keep something consistent while we're growing upon it. And we've got a good foundation now with the release of our last product. A lot of that hardware will be used as a foundation for the next generation product, and as such, we can leverage a lot of the work that was done on the software OS side as well. I think there was one more.
I have a question. So you want to hire a test lead or senior test engineer. So 2 parts. One is what are the top 2 or 3 skills you look for, and second thing is market is hot. Why should a test lead or senior test engineer join Recon, what's your sales pitch around it?
Sure. First question, I think the top couple attributes that we're looking for in a test engineering lead is, and the reason it's titled test engineering lead is because our goal is to bring in somebody with potentially development background, not necessary. I've talked to some people that have come through the testing ranks and live and thrive there. But the goal is to have somebody with a technical background that can actually delve into the various levels of software and firmware that we're playing at to really dig deep and get beyond the upper level. So the challenge that we have today with the way things are developed is that we've got everything from very low level firmware sitting on our own custom hardware to high level apps sitting on an iPhone or Android phone, for an example. And the QA team is working top down in that environment, and the development team is unit testing bottom up. And there's sort of that crust in the middle that nobody's getting to on a consistent basis, that we can rerun tests and really bang on that and see what the health of that middleware is. So our goal is to find somebody that can sort of come from the top down and get to enough of a depth level that they can meet and talk the same language as the developers. The number two key attribute there, I think, would be somebody that can come in and translate what's important to the core of the product and make some recommendations on, if there's bugs at any given time, but we need to be able to prioritize those bugs within the context of what our customers need and what we're developing the product to do and where we are in the product lifecycle and that sort of thing. So somebody that is able to also play within constraints or take some constraints or some product guidance and then use those in their day-to-day dealings and help prioritize what we're heavily focused on in terms of bug crushing. And then I think that the next question is an easy one. I mean, Recon is an awesome place to work. We've had a ton of good press lately. We've had a recent investment from Intel, which gives us good sort of forward support that the technology industry is backing us and wants to see us succeed. We are in a market that is crazy, thriving, hot today, as evidenced by 2014 CES, where wearable computing was at the forefront of the news there, and there were dozens and dozens of vendors promoting product there, a handful of which were in the heads of display or sort of eyewear or head-mounted compute markets. And we are the only one of those vendors in the market that are shipping product in industry today at a consumer level. So that's, it's overall, it's a pretty cool market to be in and a very cool place to work, and the fact that it's in Vancouver is even that much more unique. So thanks, Prakash. Appreciate the opportunity there to market a little further.
And you can take your product to the mountains there.
That's right. Now that we have snow, you can go and the thing I actually like the most about working at Recon in the industry is that you can touch and feel the product, and it's got all these very cool components, and it happens under one roof. We design and build and manufacture everything from the plastics to the software that sits on top of it, and that includes all the hardware, electronics that sit in the middle, all the firmware that sits on that, and down to the packaging. It all happens under this small roof in Yaletown, where there's 50 of us, and fairly engineering focused, but lots of different resources fighting for the same end result under one roof.
I think there are two more advantages to working for Recon. The first would be you can take the product to do the testing on Whistler, on bench. That's the first one. And second one would be you are next to Dubai Yoga, right? So those are two benefits.
You can stretch and go up for the weekend and get a good burn in, and then stretch it out next day.
Cool. All right. Yes, please. Yes.
Yep. Okay. Let me answer the second one first. Never. Yeah, there's always bugs in the product, and you can guarantee that. I could pull out my smartphone and pull up any app in the market, and if we look hard enough, there's going to be bugs there. So we need to be testing consistently, and the focus of testing changes through the release cycle of the product, but it's always happening in the background. And especially with the nature of our product, where there's a lot happening sort of under the sheets of that crust that I talked about, where over time we're able to get deeper and deeper, and we want to shorten that time window, but to the point where we always want to test and understand nuances between different protocols and hardware that's taking place. To the first question on the go no go criteria, we typically base, if you were to forecast a go no go at the beginning of a sprint, it would be based on the criteria that we've laid out and goals of a given sprint or releases that may be, and we've got functional requirement documents that the product management team puts together and manages it on an ongoing basis, to where we're saying on day one, this is what the product should look like at a very high level, and that's a living document that we then share with development over the release cycle of the product, and mold it and tweak and tune it as we see some of the development happening and make changes as needed. So it's a flexible criteria, but as you're getting closer and closer to the release, I think it's pretty clear what everybody's working towards, and then typically we've got potentially a handful of features that fall into a nice to have category, whereas everything else is in a must have, and that really defines a go no go. What we call our MVP product, our minimum viable product, or minimum viable release, as it may be, to the point where any of the a macro issue will stand out and very easily gate a release, and then it's really the nuances on a function working, but not, like I talked about on the calibration, maybe not working to the point where 100% of the customers are going to get it right every time or not run into an issue, and that's where discussion and decision comes into play to determine if it's a go or no go. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. So following up on this, for any product company, they have their customers. Do your customers, do they log defects, find or do test your products? How do you deal with those defects in your next releases?
Sure. Good question. The Recon products, we do have a forum. We've actually got a public forum, which is accessible by anybody, that you can go and post issues that you've got with the product, and have a dialogue with customer service, as it may be. Also, and so that exists and lives, and we prioritize that, or the issues that come in through that forum in a given way, and try to benchmark those against issues that are known based on our own internal team's finding. A lot of times customers are finding issues that are new to us, that we then need to go reproduce inside of QA and then prioritize that in the issue funnel. And then beyond that, we have call support, actually, email and call support, to the point where bugs come in through customer service. Customer service is working at a high level to try to resolve any low-hanging fruit kind of issues, and then anything that dips below that falls into QA. So QA supports, one of our roles is to support the customer service team, and again, depending on the bug, whether it's a known issue or not, it will fall into Jira, where everything else lives within the company, and we define priority based on that. If it's something that's high priority that we're seeing common occurrences on a recently released drop, for example, we'll have a dialogue and actually have a tiger team type meeting and jump on a given issue and see the best way to resolve that and determine whether or not a patch release needs to go out, or what the best path to resolution is. But yeah, we definitely adhere as much as possible to the customer voice, and at the same time have that flow into our own issue funnel.
You have documented test cases, and how detailed are they, and do you use any tools to manage those?
Yep.
And also, is there like a full regression cycle at the end of every year or something, like your seasonal final release?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do. Ramit can answer that question better than I can, probably, because he's been the customer of those test plans and implementing them. But we definitely do have a test plan, and it was something that was spreadsheeted early on, and we tracked different sheets per sub product that I talked about inside of the main product. So we've got documented test plans for the cell phone apps, the web app, and then the core product, and they all, of course, interact and test each other in different ways as well. So you get good value out of that, and that's where some of the need of that some level of black box testing that we will have even in an ideal scenario comes in. But we do have those plans. They've grown from a spreadsheeted test plan. And we've tried multiple different forums to manage those a little bit better and use better reporting tools. One of the tools that Optimus actually referred us to was freeware, and it's called TestLink. And we use it today. It's not the most sexy and appealing tool, but it serves 90% of our needs, and so we've actually shifted all of our test plan and most of our test result tracking over to TestLink. And that's great because we can test on it ourselves. Optimus can give us test reports in that form as well, and it becomes familiar to us that way. On the regression testing point, we do regression test, and actually our intention is to regression test on a regular basis. So every time we're cutting a release to the public, it should be regression tested. And part of that contract that I talked about that we developed, where anything that development is releasing into the QA team, there should be some level of regression testing done on that piece at a high product level, or in that case more of a smoke test, so a lightweight regression, and then we do a more of a heavyweight end-to-end type regression test to understand if a given release that was focused on a certain sort of slice of feature sets doesn't impact anything outside of that, and doesn't break anything, obviously, is the goal at the end of the day.
Thanks. Okay. This is interesting. How many round trips does a bug report makes when it is get fixed?
It depends on your definition of round trip. I'd say that the tip.
Before it is closed.
Yeah. I'd say the average is actually pretty good. It's probably two round trips, and those are formal round trips. There's a lot of informal round tripping that happens, if you will, within our walls, in that we find a bug. Because we're a small company, it's pretty easy to go walk over, and we've structured things this way and encourage it, is to walk over to the development team and say, hey, this is what we have seen. Does this relate to such and such an issue that we know about, or is it a different thing, and how do we need to tackle it? And so there's a dialogue and a decision process that happens within development. A lot of times that goes well, and we see eye to eye, and we log the bug and then plan to resolve it in a given release cycle, and in that case, it's that's the best case scenario. In the sort of average scenario, we're finding bugs, and there's usually a good debate that happens where development is saying, oh, I understand the bug this way, and it's not a big deal, it's not impacting anything else, and we can either do a fix, or it's something that's going to blow up everything else if we do fix it. And in that case, that'll result in a couple round trips where we're trying to fix it or work around it potentially, and turns out the resolution isn't there, and we'll have to go back to the drawing board. So yeah, the goal is, and I think we're pretty good at it, is to talk about it as much as possible and get it done without too much back and forth. And you don't see too many issues reopened in Jira, although definitely not uncommon.
So I have last question before we wrap up, and unless someone has any other question in between. Yes, please.
Since you talk about the patch releases, how differently you test the patches from the core product?
Yeah. Good question. The nature of the patch release for us, for Recon, is, I don't think it's atypical, but it's typically it's an unplanned release. So we're trying to fix something on the heels of a release that broke something, and so we want to test it wholeheartedly to make sure that we're not releasing another bug or breaking something else because it's disrupting our customers because they're having to pull down this fix. But at the same time, there's always that challenge that we want to fix the problem and we want to get it out and sort of hide whatever issue we've otherwise exposed in short order. So I'd say that we test it with the same rigor and sometimes even more rigor because it's one microcosm typically that we're trying to resolve with a patch fix. But we're testing it in a faster manner, if that makes sense. So it's typically all hands on deck on a given issue in the case of a patch release, and then we're regression testing before we get it out the door. Whereas in a typical environment, we've got a mix of testing happening where there's sort of a slow, steady paced regression test and more targeted testing happening concurrently. In the case of a patch, everybody's sort of focused on the same thing. So same rigor is applied, but it's happening a lot faster just by sort of compounding resources focused on one given issue.
All right, so the last question is, how do you address technical debt in your development team?
Yeah, so we certainly understand technical debt within Recon, and the way that we work, again back to the seasonality, seasonality is actually a great way to exploit a lot of the typical issues that you see in a software release cycle, because we're pushed to release on a given date, and then we're focused and we've got all of the issues that we released presented to us in a very abrupt way. So it sort of puts everything under the microscope, and then we've got this downtime to work on things. So during the downtime is really when we're focused on addressing the technical debt. And that's where we've got a pretty typical cadence on 2-week release cycles. We're implementing features, and it's pretty obvious to see where we're falling down and accruing debt to the point where we need to back off and address a couple things. So back to the question of what our software level is, we took the approach to at a platform level change to take a step back and say, okay, we want to do a major refactor. And improve on some things, the way that we've implemented some things, and sort of change on the methodology that we've used there. So in some cases, we're paying it back in bulk, meaning that we're doing kind of wholehearted big changes, not necessarily apparent to the consumer from what they see, but the experience is intended to be improved and the robustness is improved. And then in other cases, we're doing it, in short snippets over sprints where we're just trying to improve at a small scale, but get big payback from it.
All right, thank you, Ben. You have passed today's questionnaire.
Great.
And
thank you. Good questions.
We have this book for you.
Great. Thank you. Awesome.
Right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
me.
much, Ben.
No problem. Thanks. Thank you.
Can I speak for
Yes, please.
5 seconds? Yeah. Okay. So I think we should recognize Ed, who is here and who started BANQ. So really a lot of credit goes to Ed here. Ed, thanks a lot for starting BANQ. I know we are happy to help and take it forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Ed.